to fill your Photoshop document with the foreground or background color from the keyboard is the preferred method. It's much faster than clicking or using pull-down menus. Now, if we go under Edit, we can see there is Fill, and then under Fill I can choose, I want to fill with a foreground color, a background color, pattern, history, black, white, gray, blah, blah, blah. Don't care. If I want to just quickly fill with my foreground color, in this case is black, my active layer is the background, hold down Option, hit Delete, we can see it filled it. If I turn off that top layer, it's now filled. If my foreground color is red, Option, Delete, it fills it now with red. If I want to fill it with the background color, which in this case is white, we can see my chip over there shows white, it's Command, Delete, and now it fills it with the background color. If I change my background color, missed, try again. Background color, I'll make my background color a nice blue. Command, Delete, it fills it with the background color. If I want to return my swatches to their default setting, I hit D on the keyboard, the letter D as in dog or Dave, and we now see it's returned to the default of black and white. So now I can choose Command Delete, fill it with the background color. My document has been filled. In my document, I have a picture of a person here. I have my background layer. Now, I want to add some text to my document. I can use the Text tool. Now, if I click on screen, it's going to default, and we can see I have in my control bar, I have information about that text. I also have my character palette and my paragraph palette on the sides over here. In the character palette, I can change the size, the color, and everything else. But first, I'm going to just type in my text. And I'm typing in text that's appropriate to my image, because I am going to use this text to create a clipping mask so it only shows the image where the letter forms are. And so I will be filling the word tattoo with a picture of tattoos, which I think is kind of fun. Now, my text here, if I fill that with an image, it's not really going to show us much because those letters are really, really small. Now, if you're working on screen resolution or web resolution artwork, the default sizes probably work. If you're working with print resolution artwork, you may need to make your text significantly bigger to make it useful. So I am going to choose something like, okay, 300's not working here. Let's try 200. That's, I think, going to be a little bit better. Now, if I grab the Move tool, I can take the text that I've worked on and I can move it. Currently, the text is black. Doesn't really matter what color the text is, because I'm going to fill the text with the image. And this is where it gets really kind of fun. But I still want to modify these letters a little bit. I'm going to shrink mine down a little more so they fit better. And now I can also change them. I want them so that there's more volume or thickness to the letters. And I can do that by changing their type style to a bold so that it stands out a little bit better. Now, I have the Move tool active so I can move my text around on screen that I have put here. If I have the Type tool active, I can be changing my text, and I can change individual letters by highlighting them. So the same as in any other program where you have text, you can highlight it and change that text. Now, my text is here. My picture is here. To create a clipping mask, if I right-click, we'll see, not getting anything. but if both layers are selected, or the bottom layer is selected, we can see create clipping mask, and it puts an arrow pointing down. Okay, we don't want that, because the text works a little bit different. Now, if I put the picture on top and choose create clipping mask, we will see that, now this picture is going into my letters. So the letters are serving as a masking element. So it's not unlike what we've done with layer masks and played with that before. And we can even, I'm going to turn off my clipping mask and just make a duplicate set of these layers to work with. Now, I just cheated from an organizational standpoint. I added in folders or groups so that I can quickly just turn off groups of layers at a time. So if I turn off the upper one and go to my lower image over here, again, I can right click and choose create clipping mask, and we'll see, okay, that works. But I'll turn that off, go back to the other group, and we'll see that if I select my text by command clicking on the text layer, now if I go to my guy copy layer, I can add in a layer mask, and we'll see it gave me the same kind of result. So I got the same result as using a clipping mask. But there's additional advantages to using the clipping mask that the layer mask doesn't have. But then there's advantages of using the layer mask, because the layer mask I can do more painting, finessing, so I could use my paintbrush while I'm on the mask. Whoop, wrong color. So we can see, because it's a mask, we can paint it. Where the clipping mask, I'm tied to that text. But if I realize now, say, oh, I don't know, I misspelled something in my text, I can change something around, or if I want to change my letter, that's interesting. Or if we decide that we don't like that typeface and want to change the font, we can see how it's changing our text because it's live. Now when I'm working with text, to be done with it so it's not highlighting it or doing other things, I like to switch back to the Move tool. So you click on the Move tool, and then now we can see it. Now with that text layer active, you'll notice that I can drag it around as well. Can't do this as easily with the clipping mask. So we can drag it, and we can see how it's giving us a window into the layer below. But if I decide that, okay, I really don't like that font though, I have to go back to something better. So if I decide that I want to move the word but also move the guy with it, easily I can just highlight both layers. So if I highlight the layers, then when I move, we'll see that it's moving both. So it's effectively moving, we can see in the thumbnail down here, the picture of the guy moved and the word moved. If I am using a clipping mask, a nice thing that I can do to this layer quite easily is, I could click and add in a drop shadow or any other layer style effect that I wanted. I could add in a glow just for fun. Let's see, where's my outer glow? So outer glow is not going to work really well on a white background if I'm using white. But if I use something like green, we can see how the green is now starting to glow. So now I've put on an outer glow. We have a drop shadow. So these are all layer styles that can be applied. And again, the nice part about using layer styles very easily is they work with whatever is on that layer. If I change the contents of the layer, they update. And they work similar as well. We can see I'm getting some interesting effects with drop shadow affecting this shape, and it's working very differently than it did on the letters. So we can do the styles, but it's probably going to be potentially better to do it on an actual text layer, which is what we have in group 2. So we can use the layer mask. We can use the text to make it again by command clicking. It makes a selection. And we can make that layer mask. And if we do it to our clipping mask, that gives us the special properties of working with it. A clipping mask allows us to introduce another topic, which is a path. Now, when you are working with your text, so I'm going to go to my text layer, and we'll see in the text layer we have a bunch of options in the character palette. Now, if you don't have your character or paragraph palette showing, it's essentially the same options that come across on the top. We have part of the character palette, part of the paragraph palette showing up. Now, with those occurring on screen, if we want to see the others, go under Window and choose Character. And that pulls up our character and paragraph windows over here. Now you can see we have even more options. And typically, we're only going to mess with a few of these. So if you are serious about your typography, you will want to go into these in much greater detail. The book does provide some more information on that. I'm not going to do that at this point. But I will recommend that you explore that and you research that. Part of succeeding in this industry is to be interested and curious. Instead of doing what is the minimum, go, okay, this could have value. I should look into this a little bit more. And I would very, very strongly recommend that you do that. In the character palette, we will choose our fonts. We will choose the styles of those fonts. Now, if I choose Basic Arial, we'll see that we have other options with it. If I scroll down through my list, and I do find it's useful looking in the character palette where you see the little sample next to it. If you've typed your text on screen, then when you cycle through, you actually get to see the words happening. And you can decide, okay, those are the ones I want. Okay, this font might actually be better, but I will have to work with it. It's not fitting on screen. So now I can make my text a little bit smaller. And now if I look here, it's not quite fitting. And maybe I want to modify the spacing on my characters. Now when we look at this, we have a few options available. We can choose our justification, our indents on multi-line text. But we also, within our text, if I highlight the text, we can adjust the spacing between characters. So I can make them space out, or I can tighten them up. if I need my text to be a little bit tighter. Now, this particular one, and I prefer to have the move tool active so I can get my text where I want it on screen instead of the text tool. Then I don't have to highlight it, so then when I make changes here, it's easier to see what's going on. So I find that to be a useful method to work with. Now, I changed the kerning between my letters, and we can see how they're now starting to run together. With this and being the tattoo item, it kind of fits my subject matter on this project. Now, if I choose a different typeface, we may find that that's not as useful to have made the letters run together. Now, as I look through, I could choose something like Gil Sans, ultra bold. I like that better than the Birch Oak Standard. Make my text bigger so it fills up. Now, the way that the T and the double O are now touching, I like that. If I want to bring the A and T closer together, then what I can do is highlight those letters. And currently it's giving me 100 as my maximum. But if I go negative 150, or I can be more dramatic and go negative 200, we'll see how now those letters are touching just like the O, so now I have changed the spacing between my letters. When you are dealing with headlines, single words, titles, and the text is big and possibly decorative on screen, it is very strongly recommended that you do look at the individual spacing between pairs of letters to create the optimum distances. All of the fonts in your computer have been optimized for standard paragraph text. So when you're typing in paragraph after paragraph of text at 10 to 14 point, that's what they're designed for, except the decorative ones. So when you take a standard typeface and blow it up big on screen and do a single word, the spacing between letters is not designed for that application. And you need to then customize that layout a little bit more. That will give you a better result. So now we can see how it lines up. I'm going to turn off the outer glow. So we'll just turn off all the effects so we can see the letters. And using a clipping mask with letters is an occasion where I may not want to use a lot of layer effects because there's already a lot of texture. There's visual texture occurring on screen with the image showing inside my letter forms. In the character palette, you will notice that there's an option where we can now adjust the scaling of our typeface. So I could make it 200% tall. I could make it 50% wide. And we've dramatically modified the shapes of the letters. When you do that, you are making a font designer cry. I'm going to repeat that. You are making a font designer cry when you disproportionately scale your type. If the font designer wanted the type to be tall and skinny, they would have made it that way. So I'm imploring you, scale your type proportionally. Don't scale it in a unproportional manner. If you need to make it bigger, you make it bigger. If you need to make it smaller, you make it smaller. But don't stretch it out and do it in a disproportional manner because that's just not nice. And you are now making a font designer somewhere cry. Looking at the text tool, I will see that there's a couple of different options. By default, we have the horizontal text tool. So now if I click and start typing, I just added text to a hidden layer, which is why it did not want to work. We'll move it up and out of that group, turn off that group. All right, so here I have text. Put it onto 2 lines. Now I can see that it's remembering my previous settings where I have modified the spacing on my text so all my letters are running into each other. So I'll go back and undo that, shrink it down a little bit so it fits on screen. Now, looking at this text, if I go into the paragraph, I can center it, and it centers on where the starting point of that text path was. I can right justify, or by default stay with the left justify. So we can see there, now I have my text. That is with the horizontal text tool. We have the vertical tool, and then we also have type mask tool, which would be similar to typing in the text, but it types it as a mask, so then you can automatically have a mask for a layer. Vertical text tool is scary. Now, it's scary because if you look at this, you'll notice how challenging that is to read, because vertical text is notoriously hard to read. And I get my text to pull up tighter together by adjusting the spacing between individual letters instead of adjusting my line spacing, which I could have over here. So I change line spacing and nothing's changing. Where in my other text layer, if I change the line spacing, we'll see how it now stacks them on top of each other. So even though this looks like individual lines on my scary text layer, the text is now going vertically. Vertical text will always be notoriously hard to read, so you have been warned. When you do have text typed in, we will see that we do have additional options under our type pull-down menu. One of those that we haven't talked about yet is rasterizing. Rasterizing is where we take text and make it no longer text and we convert it to pixels. If I do that, we can see it's now just a pixel layer. There are times that we need to do that, but it's rare. If there's a situation where you know that you're working on a machine and you have a font and you can't move that font to the next machine you're going to be working on, you can make a copy of your layer. So you can duplicate your layer, and then on the duplicated layer we can rasterize that type, converting it to pixels. So I still have a backup type layer, but now I have a pixel-based layer that's going to work. So when I go to a machine that doesn't have the fonts installed on it, and I don't have the rights, the admin rights, or the ability to install the fonts, at least I still have the text rendered out in my project. So that would be something. But because that is now pixel-based, if I stretch it, you can see how it's not going to be as good as if I had text and made that text bigger, because now it is going to be getting fuzzier at the edges. Now this is high enough resolution to begin with that it's not really apparent, but if I was starting with a low-res file, then this would be problematic. So now looks the same, but if I zoom in and scale it up, we can see how that gets all chunky and it looks like junk. But if I take my text layer and select my text layer and transform that, it will stay crisp and clean because it is text. It is not based on pixels, it is based on paths, which we will be drawing with the pen tool in just a little bit, and we'll get to see the same thing happen. So it works differently. A reason why we have to be very cautious when we are doing text in Photoshop. We have to make sure that we are using vector text if at all possible. When we use raster or pixel-based text instead of path-based text, we start to get junky things like this occurring. You send that out to a high-end print job, it comes back and the client's going to be very disappointed in you. Now with my text, we have some other options available to us. And when I look at the text, in the toolbar across the top, there's an interesting option. We can choose, I do not want any anti-aliasing to occur with my text. And if you look at the text now, it is super jagged on the edges. I can also say I want it to be smooth, and we can see how it's now smoothing out those edges. And what is happening is the computer is adding in additional transparent pixels at the edges of my letter so that it will appear smooth when we look at it. If we go to crisp, it's a little bit less. Strong, smooth is the most smooth. Sharp, and different fonts will require different treatments, so you do have to be aware that you may change these. There will be times where you want your text to look pixelated or chunky, but not to be all fuzzy and blurry, looking like it's low resolution. And when that's the case, we can then use no anti-aliasing. So our text is referred to as aliased text instead of anti-aliased. So we can see how that smoothing makes a big difference, but it still is much better than taking small text at low resolution and scaling it up when it's raster based. When we have our text on screen, and now that I lowered the resolution, I need to make it a little bit more fit better on screen. When I have that text, if I right click, we'll see there's an option for warp text. And if I go under the type pull down menu, we will see there's an option for warp text. When we choose warp, we will see that we have certain options available to us to do obnoxious distortions to our text. Now sometimes this can be useful, especially for single lines of type. Multiple lines of type like I have here can be pretty ugly. We all notice that it is dramatically impairing the legibility of our text, but it can create a dynamic visual effect. The good part about doing this to a text layer versus trying to do that manually to a raster-based layer of text is I can go back and change it. I can even go back and change the text. So because I'm now affecting a given text layer, all of these things are modifiable down the road. So again, I can take my type and choose warp text, go back in the warp text window and decide, we don't really want to do it anymore because that just looks silly. Though it almost worked in this case. But we can undo that portion of it. The pen tool in Photoshop is on your toolbar. We see there's the pen tool. And we can see that we have a couple of different options under the pen tool. The normal pen tool, the freeform pen tool, add anchor point, delete anchor point, and convert point tool. We'll be using all those variations in a little bit. But what the pen tool is really doing is it's constructing a shape or a path. Now if I look at my shape tool over here, if I use the rectangle tool and draw something, I'm just going to change a color right now, because if I draw, it defaults to the color that is my current fill. So if I look at this, I will see that there's lines and it has 4 corners on it, or points. Now if I look at the rounded rectangle, we'll see that now has 8 points instead of 4. And if I go into my ellipse tool, we'll see that that draws something with 4 points. And my polygon tool defaults to 5 sides. If I click here, we have the option to make it into a star instead of a polygon. So we'll do a 5-sided polygon, and then I will select and choose star. And now when I draw it, we can see it does a 5-pointed star. Now each one of these paths, we will notice, are adding in, or shapes, I guess is our technical term, is adding in a new layer. Now the line tool, the most boring of all, okay, it makes a line, la-di-da, big deal. If I look at the line tool, we do have options across the top here. So if I want my line to be bigger, I can take and make it much bigger. So when I draw the line, oh, wrong, that's stroking on it, my bad. I can make the line dashed, dotted. As we work with it. But all of these shapes, as we draw with them, are going, here's my weight. So now it's a 5-point dashed line versus solid line. So each of these shapes, as we work with them, are going to have different features to them. Now, they take some getting used to of, okay, what are all the options for that? The custom shape is a little bit more interesting because we have a bunch of pre-programmed shapes. So if I decide I want to draw a heart, I can draw a heart. If I want to draw a footprint, I can do a footprint. But we can see how that shape is taking form. Looking closer at the shape, you will see that once I modified the stroke options for that shape, with the shape tool active, it did put a stroke on that particular shape when it drew it. If I double click, we can quickly and easily change the color of an object. But each one of these shapes has the ability to be made into much more, to be made custom. We don't have to use the pre-built or pre-designed tools. If I grab my select tool, my path selection tool, we'll see that I can now choose the paths on, if I can figure out which is my active layer. There we go. I can choose that, and we'll see here are points. The black arrow allows you to select. The white arrow allows you to select and manipulate individual points. So even though I used a pre-built shape object, it is modifiable. If I go back to my original rectangle, if I choose the original rectangle layer, we'll see that now this shape I can modify what is here, so it's no longer just a rectangle. It now gave me a warning. I'll go to this layer here and modify this one so it can get that same warning. But when we look at this shape, we will see that currently it has no stroke on it, and it has a fill of red. If I change the stroke to yellow, and I could make it bigger, we get a much bigger stroke option occurring on this. If I click on a point and move it, it gives me a warning. It says this will turn a live shape because it's a rounded rectangle shape, which Photoshop understands. And it says, well, now it's going to turn it into a path. So that begs the question of, well, what is a path? If I grab the pen tool, what we will learn is I can now make a path. So we are now able to make that path option for our shape that we are working with here. We can decide it should be a different color. We can modify it accordingly. We're drawing with the pen tool. And notice we have the pen tool and these other ones. We'll start out just with the pen tool. If I click, and I goofed, I moved my mouse. If I just click, I will get corner points. If I click and drag, that's not my line. Those are now my Bezier path handles. And these handles allow me to manipulate the curvature of a line. If I click and drag, and when I get to the final point, well, notice that my pen tool gets a little dot or circle next to it. That circle indicates it's closing the path. When I get back to my original point, it closed that path. I can click and drag, and now I get a handle to adjust that point, or that path. So again, if you click, just click, you get corner points. If I click and drag, I get a smooth point or a rounded point because it has handles. And those handles we can adjust with the direct selection arrow or the white arrow that we'll pull up in just a moment. Now, I can combine it. I can do a rounded point and another rounded point. And if I hold down the Option key, it allows me to get rid of one of those handles so that it becomes both a rounded and a corner point. And then I can click. Oh, and my first one is rounded. I forgot about that. But that's okay because I can now click and make it corner point. Because when our tool is the arrow like this, not the pen tool, it's just the V, that is called the Convert Point tool. Over in our pen, we will see we have the Convert Point tool. That's what the V is. We also have delete and add anchor point options. So if I choose the delete anchor point option, and if I click on a point, oh, it went away. That's a sad day. So when we are learning how to use the pen tool, the first thing you want to do is make yourself a box. Go, okay, I can do a box. Then your next task is, can I draw a reasonable rounded circle? And the circle is going to take approximately 4 points. Well, not approximately. It will take exactly 4 points for you to create. After you've done a circle, the next object that we want to learn how to make is a heart. Now, a heart can have there's different strategies for how many points it takes to create a heart. If I click, and now if I click and drag, it creates a rounded point. And now I will go to about the same point, the same height over, and I will click and drag to create another rounded point. And now what I can do is I can click, and we see we've created half a heart, but I'm going to do it a little bit different, and I'm going to drag to add handles because I want handles at that point. Now I'll try and be approximately the same distance across. Click and drag across the top, go back to my point here, and add in that handle. So we'll now see it's kind of a little bit off on the bottom down here. So I want to do some work with that. Now, if I have the Convert tool, if I just click it once to convert it from a round point to a corner point. That's kind of close, but that's too sharp. I don't like that. I want to adjust it. So if I have a rounded point and I go to one handle, we will see that I have the option to pull that handle up. And I can do the same on the other side. So I start to get that little bow in at the point of my heart. To further work with that now, I can now, with the white arrow, I can pull that up. And now if I go to this point over here, we'll see that if I pull that handle down. So what happens with these handles is we can use these to control how much or how little a line curves. And when we work with that, we can start to create anything that we can imagine. Now, working with the pen tool, working with paths in Photoshop, you can do it and it works okay. It works better in Illustrator, but it is possible to work with it here. When we have a path, and there we go. Oh, I want the black arrow. If I have this path, the real advantage of working with this path is not that, oh look, I was able to draw this, but we can now start to do other things with it. So let me just get rid of this mask that I had there. So I have my, I'll turn off group 2. So there is that guy, here is my shape. But when we have a path, in our path palette, we have certain options available. So I can now load that path as a selection if I want. So now it turned that path into a selection, which then I could, with this layer active, do it as a layer mask, and we can see how attractive it is to have his beard and face captured in there, and it's really not. I have to undo that. But when we are working with the paths and converting it to a selection, so those paths, we can see that they're all still there. But if we want to save these paths that we've been working on over here, then what we can do is we can add a new layer. We can drag this down so it now saves it as a named path layer. And we sometimes will want to do that so we can save this path for future use. Just be warned, there are some output formats from Photoshop. So when you do save as and save in certain formats, it doesn't delete extra paths that you've added to your document. And then that can cause other programs, when they try to open your file, to have issues. So periodically, if you save out, and you save something as a PNG or as a TIFF or a JPEG, and then you try and use it in another program and it's not working right, if you go back into that JPEG, you'll find that there's an extra path in the path layer that you didn't know about. So when you save paths or save channels, like we looked at last week, they don't always delete those in certain exported formats. So just put that in the back of your brain. If you run into problems, that sometimes can be why a program will refuse to import your asset, even though you're like, this should work fine. Why is it not working? So we can have paths, we can save paths. We can also make any type of selection. So if I were to have a selection like that, go over to my path layer, and now I could say I want that selection to become a path, new work path from selection. So now that's now a work path, and I've now, you can see it gave me the points. That can be a really fast way to start out with a path. Works for some people. Now, when I am over here, we can see we have the Freeform Pen Tool. And what that will do is it will now try and guess how best to make those points. If I go to my direct selection, the white arrow, not the black arrow chooses the whole path. White arrow allows me to choose individual points. I can click on a point, you can see there are the handles. We can modify it. If I go to Convert Anchor Point tool and go to a point, I can click and start dragging, and now it turns it into a smooth point. Click and drag, it's a smooth point. If I click again and just click, it becomes a corner point. So clicking versus click dragging with the Convert Anchor Point tool will have very different effects. And if you go to the handle, then you can break that continuity between those two to create puckers or bloated points on your path. So now if I go to that handle, I can move it independently. So I can create that pucker or a bloat depending on what I am attempting to do. With the pen tool, if I were to draw a path, again remembering when I have a path with smooth points, I want those handles ideally to be, each handle to be about 1/3 the length of the path. And that's going to give me the best flow of my curving path. If I try and use too few handles and pull things too long or too short, it doesn't give us as much flow with the path as we are working. So it's always recommended your handles should be approximately 1/3 the length of your path, and that will give you the smoothest, most aesthetic curves. So I would recommend that as an option. But once we have our path drawn, what we are able to do is I clicked on that text tool, and then what I can do is start typing text. And I need to shrink down my text a little bit so we can see it. After technical difficulties, my text is left justified. It's at a smaller size. Grab the pen tool. Let's try and click and drag. See what we get. Grab the text tool. If you put your cursor by it, you see how it gets the little curvy line underneath the text tool indicating it's going to become text on a path. And now we can start typing. So because the text was set to centered, it was centering the text at that point, causing lots of headache. So now that I have created that path that my text is following, I can modify that path after the text has been typed, and that will change how that text is appearing on my given path. So we're able to fit text on a path. So if you're trying to do decorative text, so it's following a decorative path or shape, we can very easily do that inside of Photoshop. When we are working in Photoshop, there will be times that we want to line things up in relation to each other. The nice part is the program has relational guides between objects. So if I grab this text, we can see how it's giving me these purple lines going, oh, do you want that to line up with this other layer? And I'm like, yeah, that's cool, thanks. That's exactly what I wanted. So, or I can drag it over to here. So we can see how it helps us do that. But there will be times that we want to add our own guides. So to do guides, what we have to do is we have to be looking at our rulers. When our rulers are up, then we can drag out from our ruler, we can drag out a guide. Now if I have a guide, they show up as blue. And when I do that, I can now grab my move tool, and by default, things will snap to that guide. That's because snap is turned on, and I'm saying snap to guides. Snap to layers is with those purple lines that would show up when I would drag an element. Document bounds would be the edges of my document, but we're choosing snap to guides. If you turn off snap, even though I have that guide there, it doesn't kind of automatically make it snap on the blue line, so I just have to try and get it close. So if I have snap on, it makes it sticky at that edge. That helps when you were building our layouts. If I drag another guide down, I can drag in guides from horizontal and vertical. I can set things up, move them over. I can have as many guides on screen as is desired. If I want to get rid of a guide, I put with the move tool, I put it on top of a guide and I drag it to the ruler and it goes away. Drag it to the ruler and it goes away. If I don't want to see my guides anymore, it's under Show Extras or Show, and I can say, don't show me the guides. And then it makes them go away. Say, oh, no, I don't want to see the guides. And if we want to do that through the keyboard, it's Command semicolon to show and hide guides. So that can be a useful way to see what's going on inside our document as we are working with it.